Hey everyone, welcome to Jacob Lenhoff Tours America. I'm Joe Stirk and I'm thrilled to be here talking about my debut fantasy novel, Son of the Borderlands. This is the first book in a planned five-book series, Rise of the Dragonlands. It's a sweeping, character-driven epic that explores themes of power, fear, legacy, and identity in a world shaped by gods and empires. You can learn more and sign up for exclusive early content and updates at josephstirk.com. That's Joseph, Sterk.com. Here, you can take a look at the cover of Son of the Borderlands. You can see I tried to make this cover somewhat dark. You can see the main character, Agni Kazarian, and his dark ancestor, Anton, who is a controlling figure in his life and in the epic. Now, Jacob, thanks for the fantastic questions. Let's dive in. The first question, why did you decide to become an author? I'd say it's more accurate to say that authorship found me. Growing up, I was always more of a math science nerd. I thought I'd be a doctor or a scientist, and I still, by day, work in the life sciences, though on the business side. I still find that work extremely meaningful. But the world that would become Son of the Borderlands had taken up residence in my head. It started as fan fiction and a message board based role play in the late 1990s, but it quickly outgrew that. The story was there for years. I just didn't feel ready to write it. I had a few false starts. Either the world felt shallow, the characters felt shallow, or otherwise I wasn't ready. It wasn't until more recently, when I hit some dark seasons in life, that I felt I'd lived enough and heard enough to write something honest. And in 2020, like many other COVID projects, I made the commitment. I found a coach to make me accountable, and I treated it like the serious endeavor that I always wanted to be. Now, while I love my day job, I'll die as an author. Question number two, were you always interested in writing? I'd say it was an avocation at best. I always had a thing for reading and even writing essays in school, but it was rarely a work of creative imagination. It wasn't me, it wasn't personal, but it simmered under the surface the whole time. I guess my first exposure to fantasy was Tolkien's The Hobbit, my first real fantasy read. But really, what shaped me more were Nintendo and Super Nintendo adventure games and RPGs. Often the graphics were crude, the plots were simple, often full of holes, but my imagination did the heavy lifting and more than compensated for that. You could say that's where I started world building, even if I didn't know it yet. The first book I remember loving, question number three, that might be The Hobbit, but the first stories that really gripped me were interactive. Video games, especially old school RPGs like Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Breath of Fire. Now, compared to the present day, those games had limits in terms of visuals and dialogues, but they still carried powerful plots and lessons. Some characters had some inspiring redemptive arcs. They rose and fell under the consequences of their own actions. There was comedy, there was tragedy. I loved the music, the lore, the crypt moments behind it. It was magic. Later on, I got deep into the King Arthur cycle, things like Greek, Roman, and Norse myths as well. There's still a tragedy and a majesty that to those old stories that stuck with me. I might have been a science person. I actually majored in biochemistry at Harvard as an undergrad, but my most memorable classes were number one, the one on King Arthur and that whole mythos, and the concept of the hero in Greek mythology. I felt that they illustrated things truer than true, the human experience. In fact, my budding imprint, Star Wolf Press, already has the unofficial motto of things truer than true. Question number four, to talk about Son of the Borderlands. It's about Agni Kazarian, the main character, the last son of a fading noble house. As a child, he's confronted by a spirit from his own bloodline, his ancestor Anton, like you could see in the cover. He's a long dead emperor and son of their god, Varanox, the god of dragons, who offers him a choice to die in obscurity as their god intended, or to live and one day help restore his empire to glory. Of course, Agni chooses to live, but the cost of that choice follows him well into adulthood. 20 years later, he's a decorated soldier. He's a hero of the realm. But inside, he's torn between the empire he's sworn to protect, the shadow of Anton, and with that, the question of who he truly is. It's dark and it's epic, but more than all that, it's personal. Now, where did I draw inspiration for the novel? I've read all the big fantasy names like Tolkien, Martin, Abercrombie, but really my core inspirations came from outside that. I didn't want to write to a formula. It came from studies of psychology and religion and human nature. For one, the idea of legacy plays a big part in the whole thing, like how we inherit the consequences of other people's choices, often going way back, how things like faith and ambition collide, and how people break when the things they worship betray them. I'm also fascinated by the fears that shaped early man, the sheer helplessness they must have felt in the face of rampant starvation, nature that really tried to get them at every opportunity, and in fact, the notion that we worship what we fear, and that all power comes at a cost. So the gods, with their animalistic features, gave them the features of the predators that they fear the most. In the mortal realms, that's the dragon, the orca, the rock falcon, and the tiger. But they also gave them their warlike nature. And I've always been fascinated by layers of power. In his younger days, Agni sought freedom from the schemes of men, but as he grew from a boy to a soldier to a general to the high general of the Salantian Empire, he only became involved more deeply in them. Really, those ideas were the fuel, and fantasy in this world was the canvas. The next question, is there a character I drew inspiration from past novels and movies? I would say there are small parts of it, but ultimately, Agni and the other characters came more from my own heart. I took the idea of the animal featured tribes in the book from the Breath of Fire series, an old RPG series that was most salient back in the late 90s, but I took them in a very different direction. I didn't want to repeat anyone's formulas, but I liked Tolkien's moral clarity and George R. R. Martin's complexity of the world, but I really wanted something in between, a world where good and evil exist, but as Solzhenitsyn said, the line between them runs through everyone's heart, and everyone has the capacity for both. Next question, was I always into fantasy and sci-fi growing up? Were there certain toys, shows, action figures? I wasn't a big action figure kid. I liked some shows like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but really I had an oversized imagination. That's where it came from. It wasn't the fandom that drew me in. It was the worlds that were created. But paradoxically, I didn't really let myself dive into fantasy for a long time. In some ways, I was scared of it. I think part of me was afraid that if I opened that door, I'd disappear into it. But eventually, as I grew up, I wrote this book. I realized that's the point. You're supposed to disappear a little bit. Next question, what character in the story reminds me of myself? That one's easy. Agni is me, at least in terms of the way he solves problems, his inner struggles between a desire to do good and a fear of a darkness that's inside him. He has questions of identity that I too have grappled with, conflicts of what he wants and what's expected of him. That's me. What can I say? I think other characters capture aspects of that. Like Anton, he started off as a more generic evil emperor type back when the story was still fan fiction. But in the words of one friend, he felt like the boss of a fighting game with no build-up. It didn't really hold up once the world became real. He evolved into something much more primal, something within each of us. A deep pain turned into a desire for revenge and a morality completely subordinated to it. A rage at his own lack of power, even if his power was great. He takes from a lot of classical villains like Frankenstein, Dracula, the Antichrist, very, very classic archetypes that strike at something primal in our nature. Frankenstein's obsession with creation and restoring the past, Dracula's rage at God, in this case, Anton's divine father. I find him terrifying, not because he's wrong, but because he speaks twisted truth. He's almost right. The next question: what was the hardest part of the world to create? In fantasy, the world building is everything. The politics, the history, and the cosmology not only had to be consistent, it had to play into the broad themes I wanted to convey that I talked about earlier. And it has to feel larger than the plot itself, like the world didn't just exist to contain the story. And that meant having to write things like myths, religions, bloodlines, internal dynamics of several different powers, all these things that really make the world feel lived in. And it took years and a lot of feedback to get it right. But now when a character references the past or a leader or a war, I know exactly what they're talking about. It feels extremely real to me, and I think that ultimately paid off. What did I take away from writing the book? Man, just so many things came out of it. I learned resilience in a way that, any demanding job or academic course never did. It taught me how to push through doubt and how to improve at something that I haven't been formally trained in. Like I said, I was more the math and science guy. I had worked that muscle, but I hadn't worked this one, and in fact was afraid of it for a long time. And with that, how to take feedback on the single most personal endeavor I'd ever undertaken. I learned patience. This world has sat in my head for over 25 years, and the story would not have felt whole or three-dimensional until now. And finally, optimism, that my triumphs and tribulations over the years hold lessons for others, and that I can transmute them into something better and something that people can learn from. I want Son of the Borderlands and the coming books to be more than just an entertaining read. I want to be a page turner, but I want them to illustrate, like I said, things truer than true. And I've also come to believe that everyone has a book within them. As I've reconnected with a lot of friends I haven't seen in a long time, I tell them this as well. Your story has meaning and it has something that everyone else can learn from. The next question: when is the book available? It'll be available soon. It's planned to launch early in September 2025. Right now, I'm finalizing the launch plans. Again, if you head to josephstirk.com, you can sign up for updates and be the first to know when it drops, including pre-orders, special edition, exclusive stories, and lore from around the world. If you really want to help, you can become an advanced reader. If you sign up under contact and collaborations, I'll put you on a mailing list to become some of the first advanced readers on the condition that you leave honest feedback on one or more sites. The last question: am I going to write more books or any other ideas? And the answer is absolutely. Like I said, I'm going to die an author. Son of the Borderlands is just the beginning. Right now, the full Rise of the Dragonlance series is 5 books long, and each one is going to get deeper, darker, and more intense. The second one has been outlined and is being written as we speak. The plot of later ones are painted in general strokes as well. The world will expand, the universe of characters will expand, but it's always going to be character focused. That's the whole point of what I'm doing. And beyond that, I have a prequel in mind of Agni's rise to power, short stories, side projects, and completely disconnected from the world, a memoir of that dark time in my life that I talked about. I'm committed to this right now, and I'm not going to stop. Now, with that, thank you, Jacob, for the opportunity, and thanks to everyone watching. If you like dark epic fantasy with a heart, soul, and a little bit of danger, check out Son of the Borderlands at josephstirk.com. Thanks again. See you on the other side.